Samsung still sells more smartphones than almost anyone on Earth. Their global market share sat at roughly 19% in 2025, with over 1 billion people using a Galaxy device. The logo is everywhere. The ads are relentless. The Galaxy S series gets a launch event every single year like clockwork. To anyone watching from the outside, this looks like a healthy company, but here is what the headlines are not telling you. In September 2025, Samsung's market share collapsed to 19%, a fall of 4.5 percentage points within a single year. That is their lowest number in a decade. Meanwhile, 88% of American teenagers now own an iPhone. The generation that will define consumer spending for the next 30 years has already made its choice, and it was not Samsung. So we have a company that looks like a titan, but is quietly losing the only war that matters, the battle for the next generation of buyers. And the strangest part? Nobody broke in and took this from them. There was no hostile rival, no disruptive outsider, no single catastrophic moment the public witnessed in real time. The damage came from inside the building. Samsung built the weapons, handed them to their enemies, and called it a strategy. This is the story of how the most powerful Android brand in history killed its own phone business, and why almost nobody noticed until it was too late. There was a time when Samsung was genuinely unstoppable. Between 2012 and 2014, the Galaxy series was not just competing with Apple, it was setting the terms of the entire smartphone conversation. Samsung's engineers were moving faster, shipping bolder hardware, and taking risks that Cupertino simply would not take. The Galaxy Note arrived with a stylus when everyone said consumers wanted smaller screens. The S3 introduced features like wireless charging and expandable storage that felt like science fiction compared to what Apple was offering. At their peak in 2013 and 2014, Samsung commanded roughly 30 to 32% of global smartphone shipments. That is a market share figure that has never been surpassed by any single vendor since. They were not just winning, they were in a different league. Android had found its champion, and that champion had a plan. Every year, a faster chip. Every year, a better display. Every year, a reason for millions of people around the world to line up and upgrade. The S6, launched at Mobile World Congress in 2015, was perhaps their finest hour. Glass and metal. A curved-edge display that wrapped around the sides. A camera that made competing phones look like toys. Samsung held 27.8% of the global market in Q1 2015. Apple was at 19.9%. Samsung was the story. Samsung was the standard. Everything after this moment would slowly, quietly become something else entirely. If you have ever owned a Galaxy phone and felt like something changed, this video is going to explain exactly what happened and why. Hit subscribe now because the next part of this story is where it gets very uncomfortable for Samsung's boardroom. October 2016 was when the first crack appeared in public. The Galaxy Note 7 had launched to enormous praise, with a better battery, a better screen, and a refined design. It was supposed to be the phone that cemented Samsung's engineering reputation for the next decade. Instead, it started catching fire. On planes, in bedrooms, in people's hands. Samsung recalled 2.5 million devices. Analysts projected total losses of up to $17 billion when accounting for lost sales across the entire Note 7 product cycle. But the financial figure, as staggering as it was, is almost beside the point. Nomura analysts warned that the incident could hurt demand for Samsung's other smartphone models, slashing mobile division profit estimates by as much as 85% in Q4 2016. The deeper wound was psychological. Samsung had built its entire brand identity on the idea that they were the engineer. The detail-obsessed, hardware-first company that would never cut a corner where it mattered. One exploding battery did not just kill a product, it killed the story. And in the consumer electronics business, the story is everything. What happened next inside the boardroom is where the real damage began. Instead of slowing down, rebuilding trust, and doubling down on the engineering culture that had made them great, Samsung panicked. And panicked companies make decisions that feel safe in the short term and fatal in the long run. The first thing loyal Samsung customers noticed was the headphone jack disappearing from the Galaxy S8 in 2017. Then the microSD card slot started vanishing from flagship models. Then the removable battery, which had been a beloved feature, was gone entirely. Each decision came with a logical-sounding explanation from Samsung's communications team. Thinner design, better water resistance, premium construction. But the people who had chosen Samsung precisely because it was not Apple started asking a painful question. Why is Samsung becoming Apple? The headphone jack removal was not just an inconvenience, it was a signal. It told the community of power users, the tech-forward early adopters who had evangelized Galaxy phones to their friends and families, that the company was no longer designing for them. It was designed for the mass market, for the spec sheet, for the retail shelf. The people who had been Samsung's most loyal advocates, the ones who posted comparisons on forums and recommended Galaxy phones at family dinners, felt genuinely betrayed. And betrayal, in brand psychology, is not something consumers forget. They do not switch quietly. They switch loudly. They post. They warn. They become the loudest voices in the room, except now they are pointing people away from Samsung instead of toward it. Samsung had spent years building an army of true believers, and then handed that army a reason to defect. While the feature stripping was happening on the outside, something uglier was happening on the inside. For years, Samsung had been shipping two different versions of the same phone. Customers in North America received Galaxy flagships powered by Qualcomm's Snapdragon processors. Customers in Europe, India, the Middle East, and much of Asia received the same phone with Samsung's own Exynos chip inside. Independent benchmarks from sources like GSM Arena and Notebook Check consistently showed that Exynos-powered Galaxy phones delivered weaker multi-core performance and struggled more with heat management during extended workloads. The practical consequences were real. Games ran hotter, batteries drained faster, performance throttled under sustained pressure. Two people buying the same model could end up with vastly different experiences based solely on where they live. Here is the part that made customers genuinely furious. They were paying identical prices. A Galaxy S23 Ultra costs the same in London as it did in Los Angeles. But the person in London was getting an inferior product, not slightly inferior, measurably, demonstrably, benchmarkably inferior. And Samsung knew. Their own engineers knew. The decision was made anyway, because using Exynos chips instead of paying Qualcomm's licensing fees saved money at scale. This is not a cost-cutting story dressed up as an engineering strategy. This is a company deciding that millions of loyal customers in entire continents were worth less than a margin point on a balance sheet. Now comes the part that changes how you see everything else in this story. While Samsung Mobile was removing features, shipping inferior chips to loyal customers, and watching its brand trust erode, another division inside the same company was having a spectacular decade. Samsung Display, Samsung Semiconductor, the component arms. In 2024 alone, Samsung Display shipped 124 million OLED panels to Apple, 64 million of which went directly into the iPhone 16 series. Read that again. Samsung almost certainly made the screens inside your iPhone. Samsung Display held a 41% revenue share of the global OLED market in 2024 and 2025, making it the dominant supplier of the technology that powers premium smartphones worldwide. Their customers included the very companies demolishing Samsung Mobile's market share. Apple was buying their screens, Xiaomi was buying its memory chips. Oppo and Vivo, two of the Chinese brands eating Samsung alive in Asia, were being partially built with Samsung components. By Q1 2026, Samsung's semiconductor division accounted for roughly 94% of the company's total operating profit. The chip cycle had briefly turned the entire conglomerate into a memory company with a smartphone side business. The assassin was not outside the gates, it was in the next building, filing a very profitable quarterly report. The generational data tells a story that Samsung's marketing department does not want to talk about out loud. As of 2025, 88% of American teenagers own an iPhone, up from 85% just a year earlier and nearly double the figure from a decade ago. A Bloomberg Intelligence survey found that 79% of Gen Z smartphone users in the United States prefer iPhones to the competition. This is not simply a market share number, it is a loyalty pipeline. The psychology of first phone attachment is well established. Historical patterns show that over 90% of iPhone users upgrade within the Apple ecosystem. Every teenager who picks up an iPhone today is, statistically, an iPhone user for life. Samsung is not just losing a sale, they are losing a customer permanently. The cultural dimension makes it worse. For Gen Z, the iPhone is not a product. It is social infrastructure. It is iMessage. It is AirDrop. It is the green bubble that marks you as an outsider in a group chat. Samsung made phones that were technically competitive and sometimes technically superior, but they never built a culture. They never built the kind of social gravity that makes switching feel like a loss of identity. Apple did. And by the time Samsung strategists understood what was actually happening, the window had largely closed. Samsung's brand loyalty in the US was 76% in 2025, compared to Apple's 89%. In a generation that has grown up entirely on iPhones, that gap is not closing. It is widening. In 2019, Samsung introduced the Galaxy Z Fold, a folding phone, a device that bent in half, opened into a small tablet, and cost over $2,000. It was genuinely impressive engineering. It was also, from a commercial and narrative standpoint, a distraction precisely timed to arrive when Samsung's core lineup had run out of ideas. The Fold gave Samsung something to talk about at press events. Journalists wrote about it. Tech reviewers filmed unboxing videos. The internet generated millions of impressions. And all of that noise covered something that the numbers quietly confirmed. The Galaxy S series, Samsung's bread-and-butter flagship line, had stopped meaningfully innovating. In 2024, Samsung's overall smartphone shipments declined to 222.9 million units, a 1.6% drop from the prior year, attributed largely to weakness in their core mid-range and flagship lines. The foldables remained a niche product, priced out of reach for most buyers, and plagued in early generations by durability concerns that reinforced exactly the engineering anxiety Samsung was trying to escape after the Note 7. You cannot rebuild a reputation for engineering excellence by selling a fragile, expensive novelty to enthusiasts, while the phone most people actually buy quietly stagnates. The Fold bought Samsung headlines. The S series needed substance. Samsung gave it a marketing budget instead. The public never saw the internal war, but the evidence of it is written into every product decision Samsung made in this period. On one side of the company sat Samsung Electronics, the division that manufactures OLED panels, memory chips, and semiconductors for the global market. On the other side sat Samsung Mobile, the division trying to maintain Galaxy's position as a premium consumer brand. Their interests had become structurally opposed. Every panel Samsung displays sold to Apple at a healthy margin was a panel that made the iPhone more competitive. Every memory chip sold to Xiaomi improved the performance of a phone, actively taking market share from Galaxy in Southeast Asia and India. The component business needed volume and global customers. The phone business needed those same customers to fail. Samsung's own 2024 annual business report disclosed that for the first time since 2014, every major division was losing market share simultaneously. Smartphones, DRAM, display panels, and their foundry business. The statement was buried in corporate language, but what it described was an organization where no division had successfully protected its position, and where the decisions of one arm were quietly undermining every other. This is what happens when a company stops asking what is best for the customer and starts asking what is best for the quarter. Here is where we land in 2026. Samsung Electronics is, in one sense, thriving. Q1 2026 was their strongest quarter on record, with semiconductor operating profit growing 48-fold year-over-year as AI-driven memory demand surged. The chip business is booming. Samsung Display is printing money by supplying screens to the entire industry. The conglomerate, viewed from a distance, looks like a winner, but Samsung Mobile is wearing the skin of a brand that peaked 10 years ago. Their global smartphone share has fallen from 30.92% in 2015 to under 19% in 2025, a collapse of more than a third of their market position in a single decade. The young consumers who will drive the next 20 years of smartphone revenue have already chosen, and they did not choose Galaxy. This is the warning in Samsung's story, and it is worth listening to carefully. Samsung did not collapse because a competitor out-innovated them. They collapsed because they chose component margins over consumer loyalty, internal cost savings over customer trust, and short-term supply deals over long-term brand building. They became the factory that supplies their own enemies. The Hollow Empire did not fall from the outside. It was dismantled quietly and profitably from within. If this video made you look at your phone differently, share it with someone who needs to see it. And if you want to understand the next corporate collapse before it happens, subscribe, because these are the stories the financial media will not slow down to tell,